This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
The conclusion of the United States Civil War in 1865 provided three major outcomes. The Union was again won, slavery was abolished, and the Southern states were physically, economically, and morally devastated. The abolishment of slavery was a good result for the nation. The humanitarian element alone was reason enough to celebrate the demise of this brutal institution. In addition, the contributions of freed slaves and their ancestors to the building of the nation following their emancipation are well documented and vast. Of course, the after effects of the war for the South could not in any way be considered a positive result. Their money was no good and their homes, buildings, and infrastructure were demolished. It is estimated that 1 in 4 males of military age in the South either died or suffered crippling injuries during the war. There is no credible argument regarding these two outcomes as to whether they were good or bad for the nation. Though rejoining the country is still today a celebrated event in United States history, it ultimately caused a negative outcome. The main reason that the Confederacy succeeded the Union was the issue of states' rights, which are guaranteed by the Constitution but were almost completely lost following the Civil War. In most instances, individual states have the primary legal authority to nullify any actions taken by the federal government as described in the United States Constitution. This includes many legal rights up to and including the right to secede. The Founding Fathers drafted this concept into the Constitution. They knew all too well that a decentralized federal government is less likely to become tyrannical because the people are better able to hold it accountable. The Founders' intent was not necessary to give the states additional powers but to limit the authority of the federal government and to alleviate the fear that it would exercise powers it was not given. This concept was understood by the Founders, the Confederacy, and many of both conservative and liberal ideologies since the earliest beginnings of the nation. Within Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution is a purposely restricted set of responsibilities allocated to the federal government. It prints the money, regulates commerce, and provides for the common defense, in other words, funds the military. The 1819 United States Supreme Court decided that the federal government also possessed certain implied powers in the McCulloch v. Maryland case. These are powers that are not mentioned specifically by the Constitution but are essential to operate the government effectively. For example, it is implied that the government can establish a bank because of its responsibility to regulate commerce, collect taxes, and print money. It is also implied that states cannot assemble an army or print currency, while some powers such as collecting taxes are shared by both entities. These implied powers of the federal government have been stretched ever further since the Civil War era. The dilution of the Constitution and the loss of states' rights were one of the unhappy consequences of the Civil War. If the states had retained their rights, businesses would be encouraged to locate in states that provided more economic freedoms than others, thereby creating competition that would constantly act to stimulate the economy. Given this scenario, state politicians could easily be held accountable for results that fail to measure up to other states. People would have the flexibility to move to a state that more closely reflects their ideals of society and culture. The freedoms envisioned by the Founding Fathers regarding states' rights have been whittled away starting with the Civil War and have snowballed since, especially within the past 6 years. Did you like this, the conclusion of the Civil War sample? To get more works like this one, make sure to check out the database of academic paper examples at ivypanda.com. You will find thousands of samples for all your study needs.